major moment of transformation. After the messenger, dismantling strife, liberating doctrine, and restoring the Quran as a balance for consciousness and civilization. This article explores how the Prophet's passing revealed another side of human nature, as his presence had previously controlled the rhythm of society, disciplined tendencies, and redirected the path through the practical application of Quranic verses. The transformation that followed his death was a profound test of human consciousness, which was suddenly left without the direct supervision of divine revelation through its ultimate messenger. As Al-Sharafa points out in his foundational article, The Companions in Islam, the unified ranks and solid structure forged by the religious message quickly turned into an arena of competition, conflict, and fighting once personal desires and the thirst for power were awakened. The Quran had issued prior warnings about this, demonstrating a deep understanding of human nature by commanding believers not to divide or dispute, which are strict historical laws that lead to failure and fragmentation if ignored. From community to strife, fitna, and the reevaluation of the companions. The fact that fighting broke out among those who were previously in one trench and merciful among themselves proves that simply living during the time of the prophetic message does not grant holiness or immunity from the logic of conflict, lust, power, and desire. This understanding reshapes how we view the Prophet's companions, framing them as human beings, subject to the laws of psychology and history, driven by love, hate, ambition, and fear. This perspective moves the reading of history from rigid sanctification to conscious analysis, viewing these events as a natural consequence of failing to fully comply with the Quranic methodology rather than a moral shock. The most dangerous outcome of traditional Salafi readings is that they turn this historical moment into a zone closed off to criticism, causing us to lose the ability to learn from the experience. An enlightened reformist approach, however, helps us understand how strife forms and how to avoid reproducing it today, treating the issue as a contemporary question about societies repeating the same mistakes when the inclusive Quranic balance is absent. Following the messenger's death, the scene rapidly inverted from a cohesive rank held together by divine revelation to a reality of conflicting wills. The absence of the apostolic presence unleashed inner energies of ambition, vanity, greed, selfishness, tribalism, and desire, bringing the question of power to the forefront despite the survival of the holy text. This reveals a strict Quranic law. A community relies on continuous adherence to a methodology that reshapes desires every day, not just on shared memory. Without this adherence, historical proximity to the message becomes merely symbolic and cannot prevent the community from slipping. Concepts like merciful among themselves become images of the past unable to control the present. Treating this historical moment as a fitna, strife, that must be met with silence, as traditionalists do, hides a deeper truth. It was a transition from divine upbringing to a test of freedom, where humans were left to their inner moral compasses. The early Islamic experience carried seeds of tension from the very first day at the Saqifa gathering, where tribalism, historical precedents, and legitimacy clashed, eventually peaking in the armed conflicts of the Camel and Siffin battles. Recalling these events aims to dismantle the mechanisms of division, showing how differences in interpretation turn into armed factions and how religious language is used to justify human choices. Therefore, it is necessary to redefine the companions within a human, non-mythical space. Removing historical idealism from this early experience rescues it from being frozen in time and returns it to the realm of learning, where mistakes can be examined and avoided rather than sanctified. It opens the door to the psychological analysis of history, recognizing power as a central temptation and blind loyalty as a framework that sometimes overrides the truth. Ultimately, dismantling this historical holiness restores the Quranic principle of individual responsibility, warning us that any group that abandons its core values, even if it carries the holiest names, will eventually reproduce the same historical strife. Liberating monotheism, Tawhid, from intermediaries and sanctification. Rebuilding the relationship between humanity and God starts with restoring Tawhid, monotheism, as an unquestionable existential truth, establishing a direct connection with Allah without any intermediaries that lessen individual responsibility. The Quran grounds this doctrinal relationship on complete directness, explicitly defining the Prophet's role as an honest human messenger and transmitter, not an intermediary or an independent source of holiness. Religious history shows a constant human tendency to create intermediaries out of a desire for false reassurance or to avoid responsibility, which leads to the sanctification of people, attachment to graves, and seeking help from entities other than Allah. The Quran explicitly challenges this, calling for the liberation of consciousness from submitting to symbolic figures. In this context, the Christian model serves as a methodological warning. The Quran shows how exaggerated glorification of Jesus led to his deification, establishing the general historical law that every religious deviation begins with a small step toward exaggerated sanctification. Al-Sharafa precisely links the sanctification of the Prophet and his family to the reproduction of these past doctrinal deviations. Tawhid is a comprehensive liberation project that frees humans from fear, dependency, and reliance on the deeds of others, reinforcing that salvation is tied to individual accountability and a sound heart. By strictly defining the Prophet's role, the Quran ensures that love does not turn into worship, and glorification does not become a sanctification that challenges Allah's ultimate authority. The text warns that any discourse portraying the Prophet as an intermediary or independent grantor of blessings creates a breach in Tawhid, turning a project of liberation into a structure of dependency. Historically, exaggerated glorification has always been the softest entry point into doctrinal deviation, starting as love but gradually assigning superhuman traits until the symbol becomes the center of rituals, much like the trajectory seen in other religions. Therefore, dismantling the popular and religious heritage built around the idea of mediation is essential. This critique of sanctification is a civilizational necessity to protect the religion from turning into a closed system that merely reproduces the very deviations the original revelation came to correct. The Quran versus narrations, the battle of consciousness and building the human. The ultimate ideological battle revolves around a central question. From where does a human derive their understanding of religion? The Quran positions itself as the ultimate balance against which all claims must be measured. However, over centuries, a massive accumulation of narrations and sayings attributed to the Prophet have formed concepts that contradict the spirit of the Quran. Al-Sharafa highlights the gap between a Quranic discourse that directs humanity back to Allah and the discourse of certain narrations that redirect devotion toward human figures. This is a call to re-establish a methodology of understanding that measures everything attributed to the religion against the Quran, opening the door to a massive reform project that rebuilds humanity on core Quranic values like justice, mercy, safety, and solidarity. The battle of consciousness is a fight for the future of humanity. It is a choice between a mind liberated by the Quran or one alienated and kept in fear and dependency by forged narrations. When the Quran is reinstated as the supreme reference, it shifts the center of gravity away from historical narrations, which are often tainted by politics, desires, and sectarian conflicts back to the unshakable foundational text. It protects the religion from narrations that were forcefully injected into the prophetic discourse to rival the Quran's logic. The Quran must transition from merely a book that is recited to a methodology that is actively followed, changing the function of religion from passive reception to conscious action. When this methodology is applied, the structure of society transforms, redefining the relationship between the individual and the group based on responsibility and solidarity rather than conflict. Societies that have aligned with this spirit achieved balance, while those that drowned in conflicting narrations and the sanctification of humans wasted their energy on identity battles rather than building civilization. At the heart of this shift is the decisive battle between blind imitation and conscious following. The Quran demands reflection, reasoning, and questioning rather than uncritical submission. Al-Sharafa's call to elevate the Quran frees the mind from the dominance of secondary texts and restrictive interpretations. Accusing certain narrations of forgery is not a destruction of the religion, but rather a necessary purification of consciousness that protects the faith from distortion. Ultimately, restoring the Quran as the sole reference is the prerequisite for launching a civilizational project that restores balance to humanity, security to society, and original purity to the religion.